When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because it didn't hurt. It was because the pain was too deep for tears. I stood by the doorway of the house I had built with my bare hands. Every brick, every wall, every corner held a piece of my life. My husband and I had saved for years, dreaming of this place where our children would grow, where laughter would echo, where no one would ever feel alone. And yet in that moment, I was the one being told I no longer belonged. She stood in front of me with folded arms. Her voice was calm but cold, as if she were discussing something ordinary. "Mama," she said softly, "maybe it's time for you to find somewhere else to stay. You've been here long enough. You deserve your own space, own space." Those two words echoed like a heavy stone falling into a quiet lake. This house was my space, my shelter, my home. But in her eyes, I was just a guest overstaying my welcome. I remember my hands tightening on the edge of the table. I forced a smile, not because I was strong, but because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I understand," I whispered. She nodded politely, like a stranger closing a deal, and then walked away. I stood there alone in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once cooked for the whole family, where my children used to run to me for breakfast, where my husband and I would talk late into the night. Now silence filled the air, thick and heavy. I slowly sat down on the wooden chair, the one that used to creak when my husband leaned back. For a moment I almost heard his voice. I almost saw him across the table, smiling at me. But that was long ago. Life has a way of turning the warmest homes into cold houses, and family. Sometimes family can make you feel like a stranger in the place you built with love. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the walls, the same walls I once painted with dreams. I whispered to myself, how did we get here? This is the story of how love turned quiet, how my own home forgot me, and how I found a way to remember myself again. I was 22 when I first stepped into this land with my husband. We didn't have much, just 2 tired hands, 2 stubborn hearts, and 1 big dream: to build a home that would hold our family together. My husband was a kind man. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, you listened. He always said, "A house is only strong when the hearts inside it stay kind." I believed him. We worked side by side, brick by brick. We saved every coin we could. We argued sometimes, but always ended the night holding hands. When the house was finally finished, a small 2-story with a front porch and a mango tree out back, I cried like a child. It wasn't just cement and walls. It was our promise. We had 2 children, both boys. I raised them here. I cooked their meals in the kitchen, washed their muddy shoes by the door, stayed up all night when they were sick. I was the kind of mother who never left their side. My husband would tease me, "One day they'll grow up, and you'll still treat them like babies." I'd laugh and say, "They'll always be mine." I didn't realize back then that time has a quiet way of proving mothers wrong. Years passed. My boys grew tall, strong, and full of their own dreams. They went to school, made friends, built their lives. My husband passed away before he could see them marry. I remember sitting alone at the dining table the night after the funeral, looking at his empty chair. It was the first time the house felt big, and I felt small, but I held on. I told myself, this house will never be empty. One day, their laughter will fill it again. My eldest son was the first to get married. His bride was sweet at first. Polite smiles, soft words, gentle hugs. She called me Mama with warmth. I welcomed her like my own daughter. I gave her the best room in the house. I cooked her favorite meals, even when my knees ached and my hands trembled. I told myself, this is what family is supposed to be. We build. We give. We love. When my younger son moved away for work, it was just me, my eldest son, and his wife in the house. At first it was peaceful. I woke up early, made breakfast, and watched them leave together. In the evenings, we'd talk over dinner. She would tell me about her day, her friends, her dreams. I thought everything was fine. But slowly, little things began to change. She started coming home later. She cooked less. She spent more time in their room. And when she looked at me, there was something missing in her eyes, the warmth that once made me feel like I still belonged. I started noticing the small changes first. They were like tiny cracks in a wall. You don't see them at first, but over time, they grow, and the whole house begins to feel different. She no longer waited for me at the dinner table. At first, I told myself it was work. Young people are busy. Life is fast. I didn't want to think anything bad, so I'd quietly keep her plate warm on the stove. Sometimes she'd come home late, eat without a word, and go straight to her room. I'd sit there, staring at the empty chair across from me, pretending to clean the table just to feel useful. My son didn't notice much. Or maybe he did, but chose not to. He was tired from work, trying to build a future for his family. I was proud of him. I told myself not to burden him with my feelings. A mother's love. It always chooses silence first. One evening, I cooked her favorite dish, a simple meal, lentils, rice, and fried fish. She had once said it reminded her of her childhood. I spent the whole afternoon in the kitchen, humming to myself, adding a little extra spice the way she liked it. But when she came home that night, she didn't even sit down. I already ate with friends, she said, setting her bag on the chair. You didn't have to cook. Her voice wasn't cruel, but it wasn't soft either. It was indifferent, like she was talking to someone she barely knew. I forced a smile. That's all right, I said. There's some left for tomorrow. She nodded and disappeared into her room. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of warm food surrounding me. I looked at the table, 3 plates, only one used. And in that moment, the house felt a little colder. The distance grew quietly, like a shadow that creeps in at sunset. She began to make small comments. Nothing too harsh, just enough to remind me that things were changing. Mama, maybe you should rest more instead of cooking every day. Or, you don't have to wait for us at dinner. We'll manage. Or, you should go visit your sister more often. Get some fresh air. I knew what she meant. She wasn't just talking about food or fresh air. She was talking about space. Space between us. Space where I didn't belong anymore. One Sunday morning, I decided to bake. It was something I loved doing when my sons were little. I used to bake bread and sweet rolls. The smell would fill the house, and they'd come running to the kitchen, smiling with sticky fingers. I wanted to bring a bit of that warmth back, but as I kneaded the dough, she walked in with a frown. Mama, why are you making such a mess? I just cleaned the counter. Her tone stung. I looked at the flour on my hands, then at her carefully arranged kitchen. Once upon a time, this kitchen was mine. I didn't have to ask permission to make bread in my own home. Oh, I said softly. I just thought, she sighed. It's fine, just clean it up after, okay? She left before I could answer. The dough sat on the counter, half kneaded, my heart suddenly too heavy to continue. I quietly wrapped it up and put it away. I didn't bake that day. I didn't bake again for a long time. A few weeks later, I overheard her on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I was watering the plants outside the living room window. Her voice carried through the open window. Yes, it's exhausting, she was saying. I mean, she's always here. I can't breathe sometimes, she laughed softly. No, she's not mean or anything, but it's just, she's always around. Like the house isn't mine. My hands froze on the watering can. The water overflowed, soaking my slippers. I felt my chest tighten. Not because of what she said, but because she wasn't wrong. I was always around. This house had been mine for decades. I didn't know where else to go. Where else could I be? I went back to my room quietly and closed the door. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I told my son I wasn't hungry. He kissed my forehead, not noticing the way my hands shook. The conversations between her and my son began to shift too. They whispered more at night. Sometimes, when I walked into the living room, they'd fall silent. I'd smile, pretending I hadn't noticed. But I felt it. The air between us was no longer warm. It was thin, careful, like everyone was waiting for someone to make the next move. I started spending more time in my room. It wasn't that I wanted to. It just became easier. Easier than facing her quiet sighs or her polite distance. I watched old family photos sometimes. My husband laughing, the boys covered in mud from playing in the yard, my hands covered in flour as I baked. I whispered to myself, what happened to us? Then came the little decisions that hurt more than they should. She changed the curtains in the living room, the ones I had chosen with my husband 30 years ago. She painted over the wall where we had once hung our family photos. One day I came home from visiting a neighbor and found the big wooden chair, my husband's chair, missing. "Where's the chair?" I asked softly. "Oh," she said casually, "we moved it to the storage. It was taking too much space. We want to make the living room more modern." I didn't say anything. I just nodded, but inside me, something cracked. Not loudly, just a quiet break, the kind that leaves a hollow echo in your chest. One night, I overheard their conversation clearly. "She's getting old, love," my daughter-in-law said. "She deserves to live somewhere peaceful, not here with all this noise." My son hesitated. "But this is her home." She sighed. "I know, but it's our home now too. We need space. We need a life of our own." Silence, and then my son's soft voice, "We'll talk to her." I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the fan. This house, the one I had built, the one where my sons took their first steps, where I buried my husband's last memories, was slowly becoming a place where I was no longer welcome. It wasn't sudden. It was like the sea pulling the sand away, one wave at a time. You don't feel it at first, but eventually you look down and realize there's nothing left under your feet. The distance between us became routine. She didn't ask me about my day anymore. I stopped asking about hers. We moved around each other like polite strangers sharing a house they didn't choose. Even my son began to look tired when he spoke to me. He loved me, I know he did. But love isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides behind practical words. "Mama," he said one evening, "maybe we should think about making things easier for you. You've taken care of us your whole life. Maybe now it's time to rest." I looked at him and smiled. It was the same smile I had given him when he was 5 years old, when he scraped his knee and said he didn't need help. Only this time, it was me pretending I didn't need help. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, but I could see the weight in his eyes. The conversation wasn't over. It was just beginning. A few weeks later, a small but unforgettable moment came. I woke up early as usual. I made tea for everyone. When they came into the kitchen, she said, "Oh, Mama, you didn't have to. We like our tea differently now. We're trying something new." My tea. The tea I had made for 30 years, too sweet for them now, too old, too out of place. I placed the cups gently on the counter. "That's all right," I said softly. "I'll drink it." She smiled politely and poured their own tea from a shiny new kettle. I sipped mine alone, the steam fogging my glasses, and thought of how small things carry the biggest goodbyes. Later that week, she started rearranging the house, moving things, changing rooms. I asked if she needed help, and she said, "No, Mama, just rest." Her voice was polite, but it carried something else, something I couldn't name at the time. It wasn't anger, it was ownership. She no longer saw me as the heart of the home. She saw me as part of the furniture, something she had to work around, and I let her, because mothers don't want to be the reason their children are unhappy, even when their own hearts are quietly breaking. Then one afternoon, the moment came. It was quiet, so quiet it didn't even feel like a storm. It felt like a single leaf falling. She stood in the kitchen, her arms folded across her chest, the same way my husband used to stand when he was trying to be strong. But her eyes didn't hold love. They held decision. "Mama," she said, "can we talk?" I put down the dish towel slowly. "Of course." She looked at the floor, then at me. "You've done so much for us. You've taken care of this home all your life. But I think it's time for you to have your own space." I felt my throat tighten. "My own space?" She nodded. "Yes, somewhere quieter, more comfortable for you. This house is small, and we're planning to have kids. We just need more room." The word room hit me like a quiet wave. This was my room, my house, my everything, but I just smiled. "I see." She softened her tone. We'll help you find a nice place. You deserve it. I nodded. Of course. Inside, my heart cracked again, quietly, like it always did. The morning she truly asked me to leave started like any other. The sunlight came through the same lace curtains I had hung 20 years ago. The mango tree outside swayed gently in the breeze. The kettle whistled softly on the stove. It was an ordinary morning, except for the way the air felt heavier, as if the house itself already knew what was about to happen. I made tea, out of habit more than anything else. I set 3 cups on the table, like I had done every day for years. 1 for me, 1 for my son, 1 for her. The house still smelled of ginger and cardamom, the way my husband used to like it. But something inside me already felt unsettled. The silence was different that morning. It wasn't the calm kind. It was the kind that holds a weight behind it. A silence that waits. I heard their door open. First my son, then her. Their footsteps were soft but purposeful. They entered the kitchen together. She avoided my eyes. My son cleared his throat the way he always did when he was nervous. "Mama," he said gently, "can we talk?" I wiped my hands on the towel slowly and turned to face them. "Of course." She stood next to him but slightly behind, as if letting him speak for both of them. I saw his hand twitch slightly, the way it used to when he was trying to find the right words as a child. "Mama," he began again, "you know we love you." My heart squeezed at those words. Love. It always starts with love. But sometimes love isn't enough to keep you where you belong. "Yes," I whispered, smiling faintly. "I know." He took a breath. "You've done everything for this family. Everything. I wouldn't be who I am without you." She stared at the floor. He stared at me. I stared at the cups of tea on the table, but, he said softly, that one word. It felt like a blade wrapped in silk. "We've been talking," he continued. "And we think it might be time for you to have a place of your own." I stood there, frozen. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood still. She finally spoke then, her voice soft but clear. "Mama, this house is small, and we're planning to start our own family. It's going to get crowded. You need comfort, peace, a space that's yours. A space that's mine." The same words she'd said before. I had hoped they'd float away like smoke, but now they had returned as something solid, a decision. I walked slowly to the chair and sat down. My knees felt weak, as if the floor beneath me had shifted. I looked at the wall where my husband's photo hung. His kind eyes stared back at me. It felt like he was still listening. "When did you decide this?" I asked softly. My son glanced at her before answering. "We've been thinking about it for a while. We didn't want to hurt you. We just need to move forward with our lives too." Move forward. I had spent my whole life moving forward for them, for him, for us. And now, moving forward meant moving away from me. I nodded slowly. "I understand." He came closer and knelt beside me. He held my hand like he used to when he was little and scared. "Mama, we'll help you find a nice place, a quiet place, close by. We'll visit every weekend." I smiled at him. It was a soft, tired smile. "I know, my son." But inside, my heart was breaking. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like the sound of dry leaves under gentle footsteps. Later that day, I walked through the house alone. I touched every wall as if saying goodbye. My fingers traced the marks where I had measured their heights as children. I stood by the kitchen window, where I had once watched my husband water the mango tree. I sat in the chair where I used to braid their hair, tie their shoelaces, scold them gently for running too fast. Everything around me was familiar. But suddenly, none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. I opened the cupboard and ran my hand over the old dishes. Some were chipped, but I had kept them because they reminded me of Sunday mornings. She had replaced most of them with shiny new plates, modern, matching, without memories. In the living room, the family photos had been rearranged. Mine were pushed to the corners. New ones of them, smiling, young, beautiful, filled the center. I wasn't angry, just invisible. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of crickets. I tried to remember the exact day this house stopped being mine. There wasn't one. It happened slowly, like a sunset fading without anyone noticing. Around midnight, I got up and made myself a cup of tea. The kitchen was dark, except for the small light above the sink. I sat alone, sipping the warm liquid, feeling the weight in my chest. I wasn't afraid of living somewhere else. I wasn't afraid of loneliness. I was afraid of being forgotten in the very place I had built. I whispered into the silence, I built this house. I built this family. And then, almost as if answering myself, a quiet thought came. And now, you must let it go. The next morning, I began folding my clothes. Not because I was ready, but because I didn't want them to see me break. I placed my old sari, the one I wore at my son's wedding, gently into a suitcase. I wrapped the framed photo of my husband in a shawl. Every item I packed felt like taking a piece of myself away from the walls. My son came in quietly. "Mama," he said, "you don't have to rush." I turned to him and smiled softly. "It's all right. Better to do it slowly." He looked guilty. That was the worst part. He loved me. I knew he did. But love has a way of getting quiet when new lives begin. He hugged me, resting his head on my shoulder, like he did when he was little. "I'll always be your son," he whispered. "I know," I said. And I meant it. But I also knew the house would never be the same again. That weekend, they took me to see a small place a few streets away. A one-bedroom unit in an old building with peeling paint and a small balcony. She spoke excitedly, trying to make it sound nice. "It's quiet here. You'll have privacy. And look, the kitchen is just the right size for you." I nodded, pretending to share her excitement. But in my heart, I kept hearing my husband's voice. A house is only strong when the hearts inside it stay kind. I smiled at her gently. "It's nice," my son held my hand. "We'll help with everything, Mama. You won't have to worry." I nodded again. But as we stood there in that empty room, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was the outsider. I was the guest. Back at the house, I began to pack more seriously. She gave me boxes. She helped fold some blankets. She tried to be kind. But kindness doesn't soften the sound of your own footsteps leaving your home. One evening, as I was wrapping old dishes, she sat across from me. "Mama," she said softly, "I hope you're not upset." I looked at her. She was young. She loved my son. She wanted her own life. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't mean to hurt me. "No," I said. "I'm not upset," she hesitated. "I just want you to be happy," I smiled gently. "I will be." But inside, I whispered the truth. I don't know how yet. The last night I slept in that house, I couldn't close my eyes. I walked through the rooms quietly. I touched the door frames, the walls, the stairs. I stood at the front door, remembering the day I stepped through it for the first time with my husband. We had no furniture back then, just a mat on the floor and a head full of dreams. I whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." I don't know who I was thanking. Maybe the house. Maybe the years. Maybe myself. The next morning I left. There was no shouting. No fight, no storm. Just quiet footsteps. A small suitcase. A few tears that never fell. She hugged me at the doorway. My son carried my bag. The house behind me stood still, unchanged, as if it didn't care whether I stayed or went. When the taxi pulled away, I looked back one last time. The mango tree swayed gently, as if waving goodbye, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the words she once said. You're just a guest in this house now. The first night in the new place was the hardest. The walls were pale and unfamiliar, still smelling faintly of paint and emptiness. There were no framed photographs on them, no little pencil marks from growing children, no creaking floorboards that knew my footsteps. When I turned off the light, the silence felt too wide, like a field with no trees to hold the wind. I sat on the edge of the small bed, clutching my shawl, listening to the distant hum of traffic. For the first time in decades, I wasn't listening for anyone's footsteps. No one was coming home late. No one would call out, "Ma, are you still awake?" The house wouldn't echo with laughter or arguments, just me. And my breath, I made tea out of habit, though no one was there to drink it with me. I placed 2 cups on the counter, one for me, and out of instinct, one more. I stared at it for a long moment, then gently put it back into the cupboard. Old habits, I thought. Old hearts. I sat by the small window that faced the street. A few streetlights flickered outside. A couple argued somewhere in the distance. A child laughed. Life was happening around me, just not with me anymore. The first few weeks were quiet, too quiet. I woke early each morning, the way I always had. But now there was no one to cook for. I folded laundry that belonged only to me. I spoke out loud sometimes, just to hear my own voice filling the room. Loneliness isn't loud. It's soft. It lives in the spaces between moments. It hums when you make tea for one. It sighs when you open a door that no one else will walk through. But something unexpected happened. Slowly, that silence began to change. It was no longer heavy, it became gentle. I started noticing small things I hadn't had time to see before. The way the morning sun came through the balcony railing and painted little golden lines on the floor. The sound of sparrows tapping at the windowsill. The way the air smelled after rain. These small, quiet things began to hold me up. One afternoon, I decided to unpack the last of my boxes. I opened the one with my husband's photo. The frame was slightly cracked at the corner from the move, but his smile was still there, warm and steady, like always. I placed it on the shelf by the window. I sat across from it and whispered, "I made it." It wasn't a victory cry. It was a soft acknowledgement. I was still here, still breathing, still standing. I hung a few of my old saris in the tiny wardrobe. I arranged my spice jars on the kitchen shelf. I placed a small plant near the window. And little by little, this strange, quiet place began to feel less like a stranger. My son visited every weekend at first. He brought fruits, medicine, or sometimes just himself. "Mama," he said during one visit, "I hope you're comfortable here." I smiled. "I am." He looked around nervously. "I miss seeing you at home." I placed my hand on his. "Home isn't a place, Beta. It's the people we hold in our hearts." He squeezed my hand, guilt flickering in his eyes. But I didn't want him to carry that weight forever. I had carried enough for both of us already. When he left, I sat by the door a little longer than usual. But I didn't cry. Not that day. I had learned something in the quiet. Love doesn't always stay under the same roof. Sometimes it lives in the spaces between visits, in the way someone still shows up. Then, one morning, something simple happened. I woke up and didn't feel the ache in my chest. I brewed my tea, opened the balcony door, and felt a small breeze brush against my face. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt. That morning, I walked outside. Down the street, there was a small park. I had passed it many times, but never really noticed it. There were older women sitting on benches, laughing, talking. A few of them were walking in slow circles, their saris fluttering gently in the breeze. I sat on a bench at the edge of the park, unsure at first. Then one of the women looked at me, smiled, and asked, "First time here?" I nodded. "Come sit," she said, patting the empty space next to her. And just like that, I was no longer completely alone. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I began to build a new rhythm. I went to the park every morning. I made friends, women with stories like mine. Some had been asked to leave their homes, some had chosen to. Some carried heartbreak in their eyes, others laughter. But all of us understood each other without having to explain too much. One of them, a soft-spoken woman named Mira, once told me, "We spend our whole lives being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's daughter. And then one day, We must learn to be ourselves. Those words stayed with me. I began to read again, books I had always set aside because there were always meals to cook, clothes to wash, lives to hold together. I started cooking for myself, not out of duty, but out of small, quiet joy. I even learned to paint small flowers on clay pots. I wasn't trying to fill the emptiness anymore. I was learning to live with it, like an old friend who sits quietly beside you. My son visited less frequently as time passed. At first it hurt, but then I understood. Life moves on. His life was unfolding, just as mine once did when I left my parents' home. And that was okay. He would still call every week. "How are you, Mama?" "I'm fine," I'd say. And I truly meant it. She spoke to me too now, his wife. Her voice had softened with time. She would ask if I needed anything. Sometimes she'd send homemade sweets. Slowly, without forcing it, our relationship began to shift. Less sharp, more human. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings, my son showed up unexpectedly. He looked tired. He sat at my small table, the same table I had bought from the corner shop. I poured him tea. We sat in silence for a long time. "Mama," he said finally, "you were always the heart of that house." I looked at him quietly. He continued, his voice softer now. "I don't know if I made the right choice. Sometimes the house feels empty without you." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Beta," I said gently, "your life is just beginning. You made a choice for your family. That's what we mothers want, for our children to build their own lives. Don't carry guilt where love should live." His eyes welled up. "I miss you," I smiled. "I'm still here." We didn't need big words. Just that quiet moment between us was enough. It felt like the house I had left had slowly found its way back into his heart. Later that night, after he left, I stood on the balcony looking at the stars. For so many nights, I had stood in that same position and felt like I had lost everything. But now I felt something different. I hadn't lost myself. I had simply found a new way to exist. My husband's photo sat by the window, his eyes as steady as ever. I whispered to him, "It's okay. I'm okay." In the months that followed, I celebrated my birthday surrounded by my park friends. Mira brought homemade sweets. Another friend brought marigolds. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. The sound felt strange at first, then warm, familiar, and then, one evening, my son arrived with flowers. And she came with him, his wife. She hugged me gently, not out of guilt this time, out of love, out of something real. "Mama," she said softly, "we'd like to have you over for dinner this weekend." It wasn't about moving back. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about belonging again, in a new way. As I prepared for that dinner, I realized something. The house I once built wasn't just made of walls. It was made of love, of memories, of quiet sacrifices. And even if I wasn't living under its roof anymore, a part of it lived in me, always would. I now sit by my window every evening with a cup of tea. I listen to the wind, I watch the sunset, and sometimes, when the light hits just right, it feels like my husband is sitting beside me. No, I'm not the guest anymore. I am the woman who once built a home, and then built herself again. When I look back at everything now, I no longer see only pain. Yes, there was a time when the house I built felt like it was pushing me out. There was a time when silence pressed down on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. There were nights when I sat alone, asking the empty walls questions no one would answer. But silence changes with time. It becomes a different kind of companion. It stops shouting what you've lost and starts whispering what still remains. I've learned something important, something I wish someone had told me long ago. A house is not made of walls, doors, or furniture. It is made of moments. It is made of the sound of laughter, of quiet footsteps, of shared meals and whispered prayers. When those moments move on, the house doesn't disappear. It just lives differently, inside you. For so long, I thought being asked to leave meant I had failed. Failed as a mother, as a woman, as a keeper of that home. But I was wrong. Leaving didn't mean losing my worth. It meant discovering who I was outside of everyone else. I learned to sit with my own breath. I learned to make tea for myself and not feel lonely. I learned to laugh again, not because someone else made me, but because my heart remembered how. If you are listening to this, and you have ever felt like a stranger in your own home, I want you to hear this. You are not less, you are not forgotten, and you are not alone. Sometimes love doesn't disappear, it simply changes shape. It moves from one house to another, from loud laughter to quiet warmth, from shared meals to short visits and soft phone calls. It doesn't always come the way we hoped it would, but it's still love. Your worth isn't measured by where you live or who welcomes you. It's carried inside you, in the way you love, in the way you've held families together, in the way your hands have built homes. I still visit that house sometimes. I walk through the gate slowly like I used to. I touch the walls. I smile at the mango tree in the yard. And when I step inside, I no longer feel like a stranger. I feel like someone who left her heart in a safe place and learned to carry the rest with her. My son looks at me differently now. Not with guilt, but with love. My daughter-in-law, too. Time has softened all of us. The words that once hurt have become quieter, and in that quiet, something new grew. Respect. No, things aren't the way they used to be, but that's the beauty of life. It keeps moving. It teaches us to let go, to forgive, to make space for new beginnings. So tonight, as I sit by my window, the stars above me and a warm cup of tea in my hands, I whisper a small prayer, not for the past to return, but for the strength to keep walking forward with grace. I built a house once, but more importantly, I built a heart strong enough to leave it behind and still love it, and that is home too.